This is a reading of the book Stamped: Racism, Antiracism, and You, a remix of the National Award-winning Stand from the Beginning by Jason Reynolds and Ibrax X. Kennedy. Section 1, Chapter 1. The Story of the World's First Racist. Before we begin, let's get something straight. This is not a history book. I repeat, this is not a history book. At least not like the ones you're used to reading in school. The ones that feel more like a list of dates. There will be some of an occasional war here and there, a declaration. Definitely, I'm gonna mention that. A constitution, that too. A court case or two, and of course, the paragraph that reads during Black History Month, Harriet, Rosa, Martin. This isn't that. This isn't a history book. Or at least, it's not that kind of history book. Instead, what this is a book that contains history. A history directly connected to our lives as we live them right this minute. This is a present book. A book about the here and now. A book that hopefully will help us better understand why we are where we are as Americans, especially as our identity pertains to race. The R word, which for many of us still feels rated R, or can be matched only with another R word. Run. But don't. Let's all take a deep breath. Inhale. Hold it. Exhale and breathe out. Race. See? Not so bad. Except for the fact that race has been a strange and persistent poison in American history, which I'm sure you already know. I also sure that, depending on where you are and where you've grown up, your experiences with it, or at least the moment in which you recognize it, may vary. Some may believe race isn't an issue anymore, but it's a thing of the past. Old tales of bad times. Others may be certain that race is like an alligator. A dinosaur that never went extinct, but instead evolved. And through hiding in murky swamp waters, that leftover monster is still deadly. And then there are those of you who know that race, and more critical, racism are everywhere. Those of you who see racism regularly robbing people of liberty, whenever as a violent stick-up or a sly pickpocket. The thief known as racism is all around. This book, this not history book, this present book is meant to take you to a race journey from then to now. To show why we feel how we feel, why we live how we live, and why this poison, whatever recognizable or unrecognizable, whether it's a screamer or whisper, just won't go away. This isn't the be-all end-all, this isn't the whole meal, it's more of an appetizer, something in preparation for the feast to come. Something to get you excited about choosing your seat, the right table, at the table. Oh, and there are 3 words I want you to keep up in mind. 3 words to describe the people we'll be exploring. Segregationists, assimilationists, anti-racists. There are serious definitions to these things, but I'm going to give you mine. Segregationists are haters, like real haters. People who hate you for not being like them. Assimilationists are people who like you, but only with quotation marks. Like, quote-unquote, like you. Because you're like them. And they are anti-racists. And then there are anti-racists. People love you because you're like you. And it's important to note, life can be wrapped into single-word descriptions. It isn't neat and perfectly shaped. So sometimes, over the course of a lifetime, and even over the course of a day, people can take on and act out ideas represented by more than one of 3 identities. Can be both, and just keep in mind as we explore these folks. And actually, these aren't the words we'll be using to describe the people in this book. They're also the words we'll be using to describe you and me, all of us. So where do we start? We might as well jump in and begin with the world's first racist. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how could anyone know who the first racist was? Or you're thinking, well, tell us so we could find out where he lives. Well, he's dead, but dead for 600 years. Thankfully, and before I can tell you about him, I have to give you a little context. Europe. That's where he was, as I'm sure you learned by now, the Europeans, Italians, Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, British, were conquering everyone. Because if there's one thing all history books do say, is that Europeans conquered the majority of the world. The year is 1415. The Prince Henry, there's always a Prince Henry, convinced his father, King John of Portugal, to basically pull a caper and capture the main Muslim transporting depot on the northeastern tip of Morocco. Why? Simple. He was jealous. The Muslims had riches, and if Prince Henry could get the Muslims out of the way, then those riches and resources could be easily accessed, stolen, a jack move, a robbery, plain and simple. The take a bountiful supply of gold. And Africans? That's right. The Portuguese were capturing Moorish people who would become prisoners of war in a war the Moors hadn't planned on fighting but had to survive. By the prisoners, I mean property. Human property. But neither Prince Henry nor King John of Portugal was given the title of the world's first racist. Because the truth is, capturing people was a unusual thing back then. Just a fact of life. That illustrated marketer would go to a man named neither Henry nor John, but something way more awesome who did something not awesome at all. John's any day Zurara, which sounds like a cheerleader chant, did just that. Cheerled, whatever. He was a cheerleader. Kind of. Not the kind who roots for a team and pumps a crowd, but he was a man who made sure the team he played for was represented and heralded as great. He made sure Prince Henry was looked at a brilliant quarterback making ingenious plays, and that every touchdown was the mark of a superior player. How did Zurara do this? Do literature. Storytelling. He wrote the story, a bibliographically of the life and slave trading of Prince Henry. Zurara was an obedient commander in Prince Henry's military order of Christ and would eventually complete his book, which would become the first defense of African slave trading. It was called The Chronicle of Discovery and Conquest of Georgia. In it, Zurara bragged about the Portuguese being early in bringing enslaved Africans from the West Cape and spoke about owning humans as if they were exclusive pairs of sneakers. Again, this was common, but he upped the brag by also explaining what made Portugal different from their own European neighbors in terms of slave trading. The Portuguese now saw enslaving people as missionary work. A mission from God to help civilize and Christianize the American, quote-unquote, savages. At least that's what's proclaimed. And the reason that this was a one up on his competitors, the Spanish and Italians, is because they were still enslaving Eastern Europeans, as in white people, not called white people back then. Zurara's ace, his trick shot, was that the Portuguese had enslaved Africans of all shades, by the way, supposedly for the purpose of saving their wretched souls. Zurara made Prince Henry out of some kind of young minister canvassing the street, doing community work. When what Prince Henry really was more of a gangster, more of a shakedown man, a kidnapper getting a mission for bringing the king's captives. Prince Henry's cut was like a finder's fee. 185 slaves, equaling money, though it was always framed as a noble cause. Thanks to Zurara, who had also paid for his pen. Seemed like Zurara was a liar, right? A fiction writer. So what makes him the world's first racist? Well, Zurara was the first person to write about and defend black human ownership. And this single document began with a recorded history of anti-black racist ideas. You know how the kings were attached to where they rule, like King John of Portugal? Well, if Gomes Enni's days was the king of anything, which he wasn't, he would have been King Gomes of racism. Zurara's book, The Chronicle of the Discovery of Conquest in Junior, was a hit. And if you know what hits do, they spread. Like a pop song to hate, but everyone knows the words to, and then suddenly no one hates the song anymore and listens Instead, listen. Instead, it becomes an anthem. Zurara's book became an anthem. A song sung across Europe as the primary source of knowledge on unknown African people. Or the original slave trades and enslavers in Spain, Holland, France, and England. Zurara depicted Africans as savage animals that needed taming. The depiction over time would even begin to convince that African people that they were inferior, like Haban in Zinobad was an Alfazi, a well-educated Moroccan who was on a diplomatic journey along the Mediterranean Sea when he was captured and enslaved. He was eventually freed by Pope Leo X, who converted him into Christianity, renamed him Leo. He later became known as Leo Africanus, or Leo the African, and possibly commissioned him to write a survey of Africa. And in that survey, Africus echoed Zurara's sentiments of Africans, his own people. He said that they were hypersexual savages, making him the first known African racist. While I was growing up, we called this drinking the Kool-Aid, or selling out. Either way, Zurara's documentation of the racist idea that Africans needed slavery under be fed and taught Jesus, and that it was all ordained by God, began to seep in and stick to the European cultural physique. And a few hundred years later, this idea would eventually reach America.